I don't know.
You kind of sounded like Smeagol meets...
My precious.
Oh, Jesus.
Eat your heart out, Andy Serkis. He'll do like a one-man play, eating his heart out. What do I do today?
As Smeagol.
What do I do today? I'm so hungry. If I eat my heart, I'll die.
No, I'm turning into someone else because I'm laughing. But I'm so hungry, but I want to eat my heart. I don't know what to do.
Oh, man.
We are exhausted.
I'm super exhausted, but yet super happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here, too.
Tonight on a very musical episode of Dreamland.
No, let's not do that. I can't stand it when TV shows do their musical episodes.
Really?
Yeah, it just embarrasses me for the actors. Like
Michael feels the same way.
Every once in a while, it's pretty good. But like when they did that with Buffy, or was it Angel? They did the music. It was Buffy.
You didn't think that was good?
Yeah, it was cringy.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was so good.
Well, I mean, some of them could sing and it was less cringy, but you know.
Yeah, I think I was not as worried about their individual
like Xander?
Performances. Yeah, but he wasn't really trying to be a...
Maybe he should have rapped.
Well, he didn't.
My name is Xander,
he didn't
and I'm here to
sing like a lot.
Sing. That's a prison. It's prison
I don't
jokes.
know. I mean, I could kind of see his whole thing in my head. Like, that sounds wrong, too.
I can kind of see his whole... And then you tried to make it better. Thinking in my head.
I met him... at a convention, Pensacon.
Was he just dreamy?
He was super nice, actually, and he gave me half of his cookie.
Oh, which half?
The uneaten half. And then also, he gave me a hug.
Oh, that's cool.
Which was nice.
He's a hugger.
He is, but not in a creepy way.
Yeah.
Or at least it didn't feel creepy. And then he hung out outside in the smoking area where all the other cool people were hanging out, like Dirk Benedict. And I was sort of hanging out there pretending that I was waiting on somebody, but really I was just hanging out with Dirk Benedict.
All right. Yeah, they'll be here in a minute.
And Parker Stevenson, who was also super nice.
Cool. Well, I guess if you're going to Pensacon or conferences right now from a show that's been off the air that long, you kind of have to want to be there.
Yeah. And I mean... We ended up actually having breakfast with Parker Stevenson just because he ended up sitting at the little table next to us.
What'd you have? Eggs? No, you wouldn't have had eggs. You'd have had like fruit.
I mean, I didn't have any of his food, but I'm just saying.
No, I didn't think you were eating off of Parker's
I just like, hey, can I have some of that?
Hey, you can
and
eat.
Parker's like, sure.
You can eat those breakfast peanuts.
He's a super nice guy, so he probably would have just said,
like, yeah.
Sure, I'm not going to eat this melon. You know, you can have some of this cantaloupe that nobody wants.
Yeah, I saved you the rind.
Yeah.
You're not going to throw it away now.
Delicious.
So that's cool.
I have this like 1/8 of a cup of orange juice that you can have.
Ew. I don't want half a cup of orange juice.
It's got half and half backwash and orange juice.
Yeah.
It's Parker Stevenson's backwash, though.
Yeah.
Crank it up like several notches if it's James Marsters.
Well, he's just cool.
He could sing.
Yeah, he could.
His was great.
Yeah, I saw him with Trish at DragonCon. He was out there with Eliza Dushku. They both did a panel. It was pretty cool.
I'm sure.
And they're both very funny people.
Yes.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to funnypeople.com, the website about funny people. You know what? We're not on that list for some reason. I think I'm going to write the web administrator. Like, hey,
what's up with that?
Yeah. Hey, what's up with airline food? You know, I'll start doing
what's the deal with these peanuts on the airplane?
Yeah, peanuts are lightweight, though, so they're easy to transport.
I'm surprised that these days they have peanuts on airplanes.
Yeah, and pretzels and weird rye chips that don't taste right. That was the Delta rye chips I had. I was like, ew. It was dark. I couldn't tell what I was eating. It may have been, I don't know.
They don't have a lot of options for me. I'll tell you that right now.
No, I'm guessing you could eat peanuts, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying like for those long flights, You know what's really interesting to hear about is other people talking about air travel.
That's what's so bad. Inside baseball of our lives for the last few weeks has been nothing but air travel.
Like, literally, I've been on an airplane for like most of the day.
You know, the Vegas airport is just a pain in the neck to get there.
Boy, howdy. Why don't you tell me about it, Aaron?
Well, if you don't know where you're going, there aren't very many sides. You don't really want me to talk about that.
Let me tell you, LAX is no dream either.
Really?
Really. Like, if you're changing airlines, you're going to have to leave and go back through security, people.
Oh, that's nice.
That's delightful.
That's fantastic.
Anyway, hi, everybody, and welcome to Dreamland, the RetroBlasting Podcast. I am Melinda.
And I am Aaron, and I'm dying inside.
And we're really glad you're here with us. Tonight, we are sort of doing a little something different. We thought this would be a fun change of pace. We are going to do like a show and tell type of thing where
you can't see what we brought.
That's right. I'm going to hold something up. Aaron's going to describe it, and you're going to guess what it is. No,
where did you get that?
No, really what we're doing is we picked some interesting events that happened back in the day. That, you know, the premise of this podcast was originally that we are Dreamland, the skating rink, and that we're like, you know, this is stuff that we all would have been talking about out in the parking lot of a skating rink or something like that back in the 80s, 90s, 70s, whenever it is. And so this is sort of the back to that idea of what would we have been talking about back in the day, like what was going on. And so we each picked some stories that we're going to tell you about, maybe give you some information that you never had before. And who gets to go first, Aaron? Me or you?
I guess I can lead. So
I'm going to sit back and I'm going to get real comfortable and you're going to tell me a story. It's going to be awesome.
Okay, so I'm not sure that I have the length of description that you prepared for. As always, you're the overachiever.
Don't you hate that person?
But I was trying to sit back and think about things that made an impression on me when I was a kid. And I guess this is sort of where my nihilistic dark side comes in, because it was always things that were like generally haunting that I didn't fully understand as a kid, and I came to understand more and more as I got older.
So what you're saying is you're going to give me a real challenge to try to make this funny on my side while you're talking about the really morbid thing. That's fine. Challenge accepted.
So the U.S. Census says that this many people died in 1982. No, that's not funny at all. But one of the first things that came to mind was something that happened when I was really, really young. As a matter of fact, it was 1986, so I would have been like in the first grade or something when this happened. But it was this little nuclear power plant in a just a quaint little nuclear power plant.
Just a delightful little quaint.
Just a good old nuke plant. Never meaning no harm.
Again, back to the musical episode.
I know, this is terrible. But great. But whatever. So Chernobyl. And I remember as a kid, I don't know if any of you guys had this experience, but my parents got me like this little puzzle, right, that had, it was of the United States in this case.
I was going to say, did your parents got you a Chernobyl puzzle?
Yeah,
that is always warped, dude.
I used to sit there and put together the Ukraine as a puzzle.
3D.
Yeah, just a 3D puzzle. Those weren't invented yet. You know, just like, you know, our parents experienced the world in black and white, we experienced it in 2 dimensions. Now our kids are going to be like, that's going to be their version of color photographs of like, was everything flat when you were a kid?
Yes.
Even the soda. So this puzzle had, and the reason I'm talking about this is because they had little emblems of like the major industries or landmarks all over the map of the United States. And I remember there were these little black and yellow symbols that were like the 3 triangles inside of a circle. And so I remember asking my dad what that was, and he was like, well, those are nuclear power plants. And so you could see where the nuclear power plants were on this map, along with like, you know, other coal plants and like major dams and things like that. World's largest ball of twine, you know, that kind of thing. They just had all this laid out, like one of those goofy maps that you get when you go to these small towns.
It sounds like the kind of map that I actually am looking for now.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I wish that MapQuest was. Listen to me being old. Waze.
MapQuest.
Waze. Okay, quick aside.
Google Maps.
On my trip last week, the person I was traveling with kept saying MapQuest it, and I just couldn't help myself.
I'm sorry. Let me pull up Alta Vista.
All right.
Web crawler, anyone?
hang on, I don't have Netscape up yet. So, yeah, I was just like,
oh, no. Let me ask Jeeves where it is.
Ask Jeeves. There was Hotbite. There was Yahoo was still doing, it was early on doing that kind of stuff. So, yeah, the internet was derpy in the 90s.
The internet was just not what it is today in the 90s.
No, now it's like
it was mostly chat rooms and creepers.
Yeah, there's definitely.
I mean, it still is. Let's be honest.
But yeah, so I was fascinated by that. I used to look at the structures of the cooling towers and think they were really cool because at that age I didn't understand.
They literally were cool.
They were cool. They were very hot at first, and then gradually they became cooler as the water evaporated. But I didn't, in my mind, nuclear power was kind of this magical thing because I didn't understand that it's actually a very simple principle that they use the heat generated by the nuclear reaction to boil water, and the steam actually turns the turbines, and so on and so forth, and we get electricity that way, just like from a hydroelectric dam. It turns the turbines and generates electricity. So I was just endlessly fascinated with that, and then I kind of came to find out about this incident that happened in the Ukraine, which made a huge splash across, no joke intended there, across Europe and had widespread repercussions for even us because it opened up a lot of discussion about should we be using nuclear power? Is it safe? And that's sort of been one of those debates that I followed throughout my young adulthood and now old adulthood and then elderly adulthood. I'm sure I'll still follow it. Mainly because the benefits of it were that you could kind of sequester all the pollution, but that pollution was really, really bad. So what happened was they were doing an exercise where they were they were experimenting with turning the reactor on and off and things like that, and they did something wrong and caused a runaway reaction to start, which melted the the inside of the reactor down. You can actually, if you go out there and find photographs, you can actually see the fuel as it melted through the bottom of the chamber and made what they call the elephant's foot, which is just this gnarly, glowing hunk of metal that is still to this day so radioactive that if you got close to it, you would die within minutes.
Wow.
And it really created, the debate of whether or not nuclear power was a viable option, because while it was very clean, if it went wrong, it was really bad. This reactor actually built up steam and then exploded and has caused widespread pollution and lots of hardship for people in the area. Other than the ones that died in the incident, there's been cancers and other things. And so what they did is they built this, and this is the part that really fascinates me today, is they built this seclusion zone around the plant, which basically means everybody who lived in the small town of Pripyat next to the reactor had to leave very quickly, meaning that if you walk into the elementary school there's still books on the desk, and there's still people's houses with breakfast, on the table or, the plates, because everything else would have decayed. And it's just been left that way since 1986, and gradually people are starting to go back in there. They've been working kind of around the clock for years to build another enclosure around the reactor because there's some significant concern that rainwater will collect all the particles and all the material in one place and actually cause it to go critical again, which would explode and be almost as bad as the first time it melted down. So it's still very much an ongoing crisis.
Right.
But some of the weird things were like, one, that they continued to operate one of the other reactors for a long time after this one went critical and had that problem. So they continued to operate the plant, I believe, for a little while. And then there's this other thing going on over there, which is the fact that nature has been allowed to just take over this small town. Mm-hmm. So the photographs coming out of it are a really interesting, because they can see how roads will degrade. Mm-hmm. It's like a study in how, all of the artifacts that we think are so permanent, would just be totally torn apart and almost gone in a relatively short period of time. And the wild animals in that area have just sort of taken over, and they've been studying the effects of the radiation on them. But in some cases, they've actually flourished.
Mm-hmm. Because no humans.
Yeah.
So.
Nobody's hunting them. But there are still people who refuse to leave this zone and continue to live there, for better or for worse.
And I hear about people who go in, in various ways. Like I think there was a Top Gear episode where they actually drove into that zone And they had these meters on the dashboards of each of the. This is the British Top Gear, not the American. And each person drove a different car, and they drove it into that. For we shall march into the forbidden zone. Yeah. So they go into this zone, and they have these meters to sort of make sure, like the rads or whatever, they don't have too much radiation, and they can only get a certain distance in to like close to where you're talking about.
Yeah, they only let you to a certain point, and there are still fields full of all of the old trucks and tanks that were in the area that are so badly radiated. So there's millions of dollars worth of equipment laying out there that they just couldn't use.
So I'm sure people go in there and try to like figure out things that they can steal or whatever.
Yeah, and there has been some of that graffiti, you know, be put in. So as the years go by, people keep going back and doing photo studies of the place, and you do see things where people are getting more brave, and they are spray painting on stuff or stealing bits and pieces of it as
if you think
souvenirs.
eating Tide Pods is a challenge.
Break into Pripyat.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it's just haunting because there's just classrooms full of toys, and there's
So maybe it's spend the night in Pripyat.
and there's houses that are I've always been, and I don't know about anybody else, but I've always been endlessly fascinated with abandoned places.
Sure.
There's nothing to me creepier than a building that's normally full of people that's completely empty. It's just, I don't know why, it just always has kind of fascinated me. So that, and seeing pictures of like Detroit now, and, you know, the major train stations and things like that, and how they've got that all done. But there's one more piece of this puzzle that, you know, that I figured out
back
later.
to the puzzle again.
Yeah, I'd like to go with themes. But just outside of this town, there is a giant steel structure. It towers over the trees, and it's a piece of old Soviet military technology. And people have been trying to figure out exactly what it was used for. But it is a giant radar array that was used in the Cold War to try to figure out if the U.S. had launched any missiles. So what they would do is they would take this extremely powerful signal and they would fire it towards the horizon, and it would either bounce off of the ionosphere or bounce off of something that had been launched in the U.S., and then it would come back, and this giant array would receive that. And this had a really chilling effect that maybe some of our parents would remember, or maybe you have even heard. But up until relatively recently, this thing was still operating and sending out this signal. And it actually interfered with telephone communications here, television communications, radio. And when it was operating, it was known as the Russian woodpecker, because it would just do this sort of pop, 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 pop that you could hear all the way over here in the United States when it was up and running. And for many years, it was just a mystery that people didn't know exactly what it was for. And I'm endlessly fascinated by old Soviet technology, because it just, everything was built on a different scale there. And people are still finding these bunkers where they had built places to survive nuclear war, and all these machines that nobody really knows what they were for and things like that. So it's just one of those.
I guess the question would be, do people now in Russia know about those things? You know, or is it one of those things like it's just kind of forgotten, even though it sits right below you, you know?
Yeah, I think to some degree they don't. From the former Soviet citizens that I've spoken to, there was a large culture of just don't talk about things that are considered state secrets, like keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, do your work. So I think there's sort of a lack of curiosity unless you were directly involved in one of those things. So there are probably millions of people in Ukraine who didn't really know that this giant structure was there, or if they did, they just considered it a state secret and didn't think about it. But it's like something that you would see in a modern sci-fi movie. I mean, it is absolutely enormous if you go out there and find pictures of it. I think it's referred to as the Duga installation. And I think it's slowly being dismantled. I don't believe it was very contaminated by the Chernobyl disaster. But if you keep reading about it, you'll find that there's even conspiracy theories that the Chernobyl disaster was caused to cover up the massive waste of money.
Well, of course there are conspiracy theories.
Yeah, so there's a lot that we won't know. I'm inclined to believe it was really just a mistake. It was a new technology. People are going to mess up. I mean, it happened to us too over, at Long Island. Yeah, or Exxon Valdez. But we had the Long Island reactor.
Well, what
incident.
about Fukushima? Like, how does it compare? in terms of scale. Like wasn't Fukushima like way worse than Chernobyl?
I think Fukushima involved more than one reactor having problems. So there are, and I'm speaking just off the top of my head. So those of you out there who have done a lot more reading, please, while don't hesitate to tell me I'm wrong, but also please forgive me if I don't know this right off the top of my head. But yeah, I think it had the potential to be a far larger problem. But I think our containment technology is better, and there maybe is some stuff that we don't know about Fukushima right now. Like there is a lot of water that was used to flush and to cool that reactor to keep it from going critical that is now just stored in these giant drums on site. And there's news of some of those drums or some of those giant tanks are leaking. So the groundwater is being contaminated by radioactive water.
Well, I just looked it up since I was like, well, I was wrong. Apparently, they're both level 7 nuclear accidents. The health consequences in Japan to date, this was from an article on NPR in 2011, are much less severe. So far, Fukushima has released about 1/10 the amount of radioactive material that escaped Chernobyl, according to an official from the International Atomic Energy Agency. But that was, again, 7 years ago, so I don't know.
And I really feel like with the incident that happened, and those of you who remember the whole specter of the Soviet Union and the Cold War, I think there was a lot more secrecy and a strong desire not to appear to have failed or show any weakness to the greater world. So I think there was probably a large effort to keep this contained.
It was probably a little easier to keep it contained, well, at least not
damage,
literally,
but yeah,
but like the PR from it back in that time period.
Yeah, because I think some people were just detecting the higher radiation in the air, and and it had grave effects on Ukraine, and there's still the children and the grandchildren of the family members who are affected are still receiving government benefits in Ukraine, good or bad for them. And then all the way like in Norway and other parts of Europe, it just I remember reading about a herd of reindeer that is so radioactive that they're not allowed to be hunted or anything, and they just monitor them and track them around.
Another example of how animals are benefiting
from the radioactivity.
Now, if we could only do that with elephant tusks.
Yeah, something to make that but yeah, it has constantly just sort of haunted me.
That was a joke, by the way. I wasn't actually suggesting.
No, I felt an iceberg of important thought there that I didn't want to just like blindly walk through and be like, yes, let's start a campaign.
Let's start building nuclear reactors everywhere.
Well, and we're still building nuclear reactors. I think France is well known for having a very successful and safely run nuclear program to generate power. But at the same time, we're making huge breakthroughs in photovoltaic cells and wind generation, and all kinds of stuff is sort of coming along nicely. So there's reason to believe we could cleanly generate electricity without burning fossil fuels. Sometime in our lifetime we'll be doing much better than that. Even the hotel I stayed at on the little placard was talking about how much of their electricity is from solar power. Well,
that just sounds like a bunch of hippie nonsense to me.
Hippy-dippy nonsense. You meathead. But yeah, that was the first one, and I to this day I still find new articles and keep reading about it because having grown up in a world where the Soviet Union was the big enemy over the horizon, and now getting to know people from there and realizing that it was all posturing in a lot of ways. There's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that was actually scary. But yeah.
I agree. I love looking at pictures of Chernobyl. I have always been morbidly interested in that, and all the area around Chernobyl, like you're talking about those abandoned places. I also really love seeing creepy, just like Ferris wheels just left to rot, in the sand.
Amusement parks.
Yeah, whole amusement parks and whole giant airports, and it's not just in this area, but there's a lot of places where they just abandon something.
There wasn't a natural disaster. There's not always a sad story. They're just the money ran out and everybody just moved on and just left these skeletons of civilization around, and it's very
like
sci-fi.
The GM plant here for a long time. The GM plant here in Atlanta was this huge factory that tons and tons of people worked at. It was like its own suburb, basically. And then when they shut it down, it was just like this. It was bizarre, and you just wondered, are people still in there, squatting and, partying and spraying graffiti everywhere? Or What's the deal? I'm looking at pictures of Chernobyl, and I'm looking at mutant animals with...
Well, don't go there, because that's not necessarily going to assist.
No, but it's a thing.
It is, and I don't know how long it'll be before that's even usable land anymore. I think we're still figuring that out.
I think Chernobyl is one of those words, too, that is just like Titanic. Like, you just can't associate that with anything positive. Unless you're James Cameron.
Yeah, because, I mean, when I was that age, I actually thought we had spaceships that could go to other planets. And, I lived in this world of make-believe where all this stuff was possible. And then, now that I'm older, I see that nuclear power is at some level, once you get past all of the complicated math, it's very steampunk. So it is kind of weird, because if you want to create electricity with fossil fuels, well, you burn it and it gets really hot and you make steam power, and the same thing with nuclear plants. Now, there are some space technologies that more directly convert that radiation into electricity, but as a kid, I thought there was some device in there that the radiation just turned into electricity somehow. So
I'm actually just learning just now that that's not really what happens. I'm just kidding.
There was a really cool thing that came across Reddit last week or the week before, where they had a video. Someone was actually in the reactor room when they were turning the reactor on and off. So they were giving it a small amount of fuel and letting it burst out. And they filmed, you could actually see the Cherenkov radiation, the blue glow, start up and the water shake, and then it would slowly cool back down to its normal temperatures. But it's really kind of cool to me. It's fascinating to see that, because Cherenkov radiation, while it's a blue glow, is a different kind of energy than we're used to encountering on a daily basis. Now that I've bored everyone to tears.
No, that's
dry eyes.
You're
dry eyes.
That's heavy, man.
Literally.
Literally.
It's a very dense topic. It's over on that side of the periodic table.
Well, so are you going to cover both of your things, or do you want me to go now?
Why don't you go ahead and go? We'll take turns. And
okay.
You did say that you strove to not make it as heavy of a topic, so
I did, and so I feel kind of bad in a way that my topic is not as of as much consequence. Probably.
Yeah, I just went with what haunted me as a child.
I went with what was I really? It's something that I was really into, and it's a thing that
Cheerios.
That really, made a big difference to a lot of people who were like me. So if you were like me and you were into heavy metal in the 80s, then you'll definitely have strong feelings about and know about what I'm talking about tonight. So on September 19th, 1985, there was a Senate hearing about the PMRC.
So what does that acronym stand for?
Which is the Parents Music Resource Center, and dirty songs. So specifically, it was Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore, was one of 4 senators' wives or Washington bigwigs' wives that formed this group called the PMRC, and they were, quote unquote, advocating for a warning label on music products inappropriate for younger children due to explicit sexual or violent lyrics.
Okay. So far, I don't have a problem with this idea.
Okay.
But I'm sure that this is a power that was used very judiciously.
Oh, well, so the problem, succinctly, the problem with anything that's going to, even though she adamantly said it wasn't censorship. Right. It's censorship because you're basically stamping something on the outside of an album, trying to convey what that album is is
In other words,
and who is making that interpretation
for the person who's going to buy it?
Is it Dolores Umbridge?
No, she's real good at interpreting.
I.e. Tipper Gore? Or is it, you as the parents of your kid?
So to me, thinking like a parent, having a source of that kind of information to know, maybe I'm not into the music that my kids are going to be into. How am I going to figure it out other than listening to it? I guess the real moral here is just listen to it.
Listen to the music is the moral.
And so I'm just going to shut up now because I just talked myself right into a corner.
Well, so
but if I'm lazy and I don't want to listen to it.
So that's the thing, right? So there's a lot of aspects to what's going on with this. It's really fascinating to watch. This was after C-SPAN was a thing. Mm-hmm. So we have video footage of the hearings. Yeah. And there were 3 musical artists who came to the defense of us all who love dirty music, that blasphemous music. And those three people were Frank Zappa, Dee Snider from Twisted Sister, and John Denver. And they all three had written statements that they read to the Senate. And then there was some back and forth between various senators and them, as with any Senate hearing. And if you've never watched those three, they are all equally articulate and brilliant, I feel like, in what they say. And I highly recommend watching it because it's so gratifying. I watched them again just tonight. I've seen them many times before, but I watched them again tonight in preparation for this. And I was just like, wow, I mean, just brilliant.
Well, and you have such a spectrum of different kinds of music. So you have John Denver that I think a lot of us would think of as a very easy listening.
Wholesome.
Yeah, very wholesome.
Yeah, but he actually pointed out that he was really chastised and a lot of radio stations wouldn't play Rocky Mountain High because they said it was about drugs. And he always firmly attested that it was not about drugs, that it was about the wonder of being in nature in the Rocky Mountains. And he said, anyone who's putting that on the song has just never felt that sense of awe.
And that's an example of the abuse.
That was his example, is that, I don't mean it this way, but you reading it, you could put that on it and then you're going to stamp an explicit sticker on my album, and then I can't sell my albums. And what happened in response to this is, I'm getting ahead of myself. I
was going to say Frank Zappa is another controversial figure in a different way. And then Dee Snider kind of represented a style of music, even though he's not necessarily in the hardcore metal side of it. But,
but he was considered, Twisted Sister was considered heavy metal. Yeah. And, he spoke as saying he was heavy metal. Like, he identified as heavy metal in the
He
hearing. He self-identified as heavy metal. But, he was sort of saying, this is my experience. These are my lyrics. Mm-hmm. And so leading up to this, I think there's different stories going around. One of the lady's daughters had the Like a Virgin Madonna album, and the daughter was like, what's a virgin? And she didn't want to have that conversation with her daughter, so she got upset at Madonna. And then Tipper Gore's daughter, who was, I think, 11, brought home Purple Rain, the album, and she heard Darling Nikki, which is about masturbation, and so it was like this whole big thing where it's like, I don't want to have this conversation with my kids, and that's horrible. And I'm listening to that in modern times going, well, maybe you should have this conversation with your kids.
Right. And this world nowadays, you can censor as much as you want. And because of things like the internet and the changes in regulations on television, your kids are going to hear it at school, or they're going to see it by accident, or there's no way to put your kids in a bubble.
So
you have to develop that ninja skill to answer some of these questions.
Well, you do. And I think it's helpful to actually pay attention to what your kids are actually doing. So this was in the 80s. So this was during a time period where parents were not like they are now. My parents did not listen to what I listened to. They did not watch what I watched. They did not read what I read. So we existed in different worlds. Yeah. And I think that was the reality for most kids during that time period. And so parents, my dad loved to make fun of me for what I listened to and what movies I watched. And he just thought it was all a bunch of noise. And he made fun of Nightmare on Elm Street. And he would stand over in the kitchen going, like as though all the screaming in the movie. Like, it's just, that's the kind of movie he called it. Like, he was like, you're watching one of those movies. And I'm just like, Dad, you just don't get me. And that was just, the struggle was real of being a kid.
I'm not looking forward to those days.
So it was just, there are parents. My mom would listen to Metallica with me. Yeah. She listened to the whole album. So she knew that it was about politics. Right. And it wasn't about like whatever crazy thing. You know what I mean? Of course, to be fair, I listened to a lot of really messed up stuff too. Right. I just didn't listen to it with my mom. But so anyway, initially the PMRC, what they really wanted to do is they wanted to have like 3 or 4 different categories of things. So according to Tipper Gore, just to give her side of it and her compatriots, they say that they were not trying to censor music. They were just trying to give a guide to parents to let them know, without having to listen to all of this laborious music to listen to, or taking the time and spending it with your kid to listen to it with them, that you could just look at these little symbols on the back. So sort of like now what we have for the rating system on a movie.
Or video
it's
games.
rated R or for, sexual situations and violence. And blah, blah, blah. So you can look at that and know, trigger warning, all of these things might happen during this movie. So if you don't want to see that, this is probably not the movie for you. They wanted to do that with music, which on one level you go, well, that sounds reasonable on a certain level. Like I kind of want to know if there's something about Satan on this, album.
Usually there was a hint, like a
giant
satanic
Baphomet on the front cover of a Venom album.
But yeah, there were a lot of and what's funny is a lot of the ones that identified themselves with that were even just doing it for shock value.
Well, like Venom would be a great example of that. Well, so they wanted to have these little different things, and they didn't really specify who was going to be making that determination, which is the scary part, right? Like that's the part they kept just sort of skimming over.
Well, I mean, the MPAA is like that now, and nobody really knows who's making those calls.
Well, so the PMRC folks had talked beforehand to the RIAA, which is the Recording Industry something or other. It's basically like the MPAA for film rating systems. It's like the music industry folks. And this guy had basically agreed, even before all these hearings were over, I think he agreed to go ahead. And instead of doing the more nuanced rating system thing that Tipper Gore's group, the PMRC, wanted to have, they just put the very familiar parental advisory explicit lyrics sticker symbol on either the cassette tape or the record. And like I said, Dee Snider comes in. Well, I think Frank Zappa talked first, and he was very specific about how he was very in your face as well about the whole thing, and how he talked about how the record industry works, and how, if you really wanted to solve this problem, his pitch was, instead of putting a rating system, why don't you just put the lyrics out there? If you guys as the government are this concerned about parents having the ability to judge, then the only true way to do this would be for the government to pay to print up lyric sheets for every album that gets created and then make it available to parents so that they can read the lyrics themselves and judge before they buy.
Right.
And then no one is interpreting it for you. It's just, and it's not like reading a whole book. It's like reading a sheet of paper and skimming it.
And you wouldn't have to read the whole thing. You just read to the point where you'd made your
you
decision.
Could skim over and look for dirty words. You could look for, sex stuff or whatever your thing was.
So how would you do this in a pre-internet world?
In a pre-internet world, his thing was, it's going to cost money, because his thing was the way the record industry works is you can't have the people who own the rights to the lyrics have to be paid separately, and there's this whole thing. And so basically you can't put the burden on the record industry and the record producers to put these lyrics on the outside of the album. And what are you going to do with cassette tapes anyway? Because you can't fit all the lyrics just on the outside of the cassette.
I remember getting those cassettes, and it was like a giant accordion of...
But I mean, I'm talking about before you buy.
Right.
Where you could read it.
There would have to be like a catalog at the end of the record aisle.
It seems like there should be a laminated sheet at the end of the record aisle, because this was when people bought stuff in stores.
Right.
You could send like a catalog.
Yeah, there would be like a 1982 record catalog, and it would be alphabetized, and you would just look up.
Exactly. You could look it up,
out every once
and
in a
then
while.
you could just scroll through or whatever. There's a lot of different suggestions. Or, heck, you could have it where it's like send away for, a copy. Like you used to be able to contact a TV show and ask for a tape.
Yeah.
Of the Bob Ross show or whatever, and they would send you a tape with the transcript or whatever of a television episode. I don't know if any of you guys know about that, but they used to do that. So you could do something like that even. But anyway, he didn't have all of the mechanics of it worked out, but he was saying if that's what you want to do, then you should put the lyrics out there where the individual parent can make the individual choice. The problem is that you guys are trying to make the choice for us, and you're branding our music, which makes it very hard to sell.
Which, like a lot of artists, they're very concerned with being labeled as a degenerate or some other kind of negative impact on society.
Well, right.
They'd rather their work stand on its own, not to just have someone see you like, oh, Frank Zappa, he's a perv, so we're not going to listen to his stuff.
Then also you've got so when Dee Snider comes out, his whole thing is, look, look, accusations are being made about me and my band that are completely incorrect. So there was this thing that I don't know how the PMRC came up with this, but it was called the Filthy 15.
Uh-huh.
And there were 15 songs that, according to the PMRC, were the filthiest songs that were out at the time. And I'm just going to go through what they were. I'll have to bleep a few of them because they are actually explicit. I'm not saying these are all just like completely innocent songs. I'm just saying let's pay attention to the different scope of all these things. So first we've got Prince, all Darling Nikki. We already talked about that, which has sex, masturbation. And then you've got Sheena Easton with Sugar Walls, which you can tell just from the title of that it's about sex. Judas Priest, Eat Me Alive. Again, there's no really arguing that's an S&M type of song. Some people could find it offensive. I always just sort of took it as kind of a joke, S&M-y kind of standard Judas Priest thing.
It's the kind of thing people say in a conversation, like, they ate me alive when I went out there.
Yeah, but in the context of the song, there's like a line where he talks about a gun. Anyway, then there's Vanity, Strap On Robbie Baby.
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, okay, so maybe. Motley Crue, the song which basically they just dinged that one for violence and language. Yeah, just because it had what's considered a foul word as the name, probably. Yeah, I mean, it talks about, that, you're a I'm going to kick your ass or whatever. Nobody ever said that to me when I was growing up. I know. Well, now we're going to get into some weird ones. So AC/DC, I guess this one is Let Me Put My Love Into You. See, I mean, that's just full of hope and... Twisted Sister, We're Not Gonna Take It. Got dinged for violence. I'm sorry, but no. I mean, if anyone who knows anything about Twisted Sister, and this is sort of what Dee Snider was talking about when he spoke to the Senate, was he is someone who he doesn't drink, he never has, doesn't do drugs, doesn't smoke. He's a Christian and has always sort of been a Christian. He doesn't sing about God in his music necessarily, but the song "You're Gonna Burn in Hell" is literally like, if you are a bad person, you're gonna burn in hell. Like, it's not like, yay, you're gonna burn in hell. It's like, hey, don't be a jerk because you're gonna burn in hell. Mm-hmm. The "We're Not Gonna Take It" thing is just sort of a rallying cry for teenagers like tired of their parents not understanding them, but it's not like beat up your parents and take their money. Yeah, it's not like, hey, if you agree with this, go do this terrible thing. No, they're like super straight edge, very clean sound metal. But anyway, then we got Madonna, Dress You Up. I mean, one of the filthiest songs in the world. I'm sorry. No. Wasp. Okay, this is the one. I'm just going to say Animal, like a beast. Well, I mean... That one was just asking. That one was asking for it. It was. Def Leppard probably didn't care. No, well, they did and they didn't. Def Leppard, High and Dry, which is about getting drunk on Saturday night. And then there are a couple of them that are like, well, yeah. So Merciful Fate, Into the Coven. I had that album, by the way. It's a great song, but it's super satanic. Like, there's just no arguing that one, right? I mean, it's just straight up. Black Sabbath. Trashed, which is about drug and alcohol. I think it's specifically about drunk driving. This is after Ozzy left Black Sabbath, so it's kind of, it's not my favorite song, but there was the Mary Jane Girls, In My House. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember that song, but no, I cannot believe that song made it on the list. I think the is two... Is it just their name? Maybe. Then there's Venom, Possessed, which again, they're a band who reveled in trying to sound satanic, just to shock people. And then the Cyndi Lauper She Bop, which I think we talked about the other day. Maybe not. Me and somebody were talking about this the other day. But so Cyndi Lauper, Mary Jane Girls, and Madonna, and actually Twisted Sister, all are just like, give me a break. Yeah, I mean, people just didn't like Madonna. I mean, they love Madonna, but a lot of parents and... she made huge waves. And even my mom would let me have her album. Yeah. But I mean, my mom could look at the cover of the album and see that it was called, like, there was stuff on there called Like a Virgin. And my mom was like, nope, you're not getting that. Not going there. So, I mean, you don't have to read all the lyrics. You can pay attention just a little bit and know, I don't think I want my 8-year-old listening to that. Yeah. So... I mean, when you listen to, like, Dee Snider is talking to them and he's saying, hey, you know, I have a 3-year-old. When he gets to be of age, I plan to listen to music with him and talk about the music as it's going on. And, like, I think later on he's talked about how, now that many years have passed, he's talked about how, yeah, I did. When he was a teenager, I listened to music with him. He was like, I would find an album that they really like, Eminem, for example. There was one song on an Eminem album that I didn't feel was appropriate for my 10-year-old. So I burned a copy of the album without that song. And, you know, the rest of the album was fine. And so that was my way of censoring what my kid hears, because he's like, it's not about saying you can't determine what your kid needs to listen to, but it's take the time, because, I mean, you might learn something about your kid.
Yeah.
And what's going on in their mind.
Well, I mean, music is a way that we expressed ourselves growing up. I mean, it was like, oh, yeah, I feel that way too. So we had to identify with it to enjoy it. So if it's a depressing song, then we were thinking about some stuff. But listening to a song about suicide doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to. It just means you're thinking about heavy
And it doesn't
things.
even mean that it's going to make it worse. So, like, I know I was a little bit on the depressed side as a teenager. Okay, a lot. And I listened to a lot of Fade to Black by Metallica. But actually, it made me feel better because it made me feel like I wasn't alone.
Right. And turning into the skids sometimes, you know, I'm not an expert on emotional health. But for me, you know.
If you have problems, call a counselor.
Absolutely. But for me, when I felt myself going into a darkness or something, I always listened to music that I associated with that. And it was a way for me to just, because a lot of times with emotions, you just have to see it through and eventually things will change.
Right.
So it's just sort of like a soundtrack for that time period.
Yeah, to me, it made me feel like there was somebody else out there who also knew that feeling and I wasn't completely alone.
Yeah.
And so it got me through. That song I listened to so much that the tape was just, like, messed up in that spot.
Stretched out and like, yeah.
But I mean, so there was a lot of other stuff going on around this time. Like, you know, Ozzy Osbourne got hauled into court. A bunch of bands got hauled into court for kids killing themselves and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, this was the time period where music was going from being kind of fairly happy-go-lucky. I mean, the worst thing you had, like, the Beatles and Elvis and stuff like that. The parents at that time were up in arms about.
Yeah.
But, you know, there was a lot of stuff happening in music culture in the 80s that was like, you know, you had punk, you had heavy metal, and they were all very anti-establishment, and they said very shock value things. Even pop music was going shock value. And so parents were like, this is a new force out there. And if we and Tipper Gore's whole argument was, if you can have a rating system for film, why can't you have it for music? And so Frank Zappa actually answers that in his response, and you can agree or disagree, but his thought was, you know, unlike someone who is in a movie, you know, acting, if some actor goes in and plays like a serial killer, you're not going to think he's a serial killer.
Right.
You're not going to think he's a bad person. He's just there to play a role, and he can still be lauded for that. But as a musician, I am more personally identified with my work. And even though I may be doing it to elicit a reaction in a listener like joy or sadness or fear or whatever it is, because I'm tapping into that emotion, I'm doing it in a different way that's more personally tied to me. So if you brand the music obscene, you're branding me obscene. Right. As opposed to an actor, or, you know what I mean? Like, you're not just perceived often as playing a role, even though oftentimes you are. And so anyway.
Especially in the metal world. I mean, there were whole characters that were created.
Right.
And then,
Alice Cooper.
Yeah. There you go. Say no more.
But so all of this back and forth was somewhat a moot point because, like I said, the record industry had already made the determination that they were going to go ahead and go ahead and give in to the parents' groups and all the stuff, like many other industries did, you know, like the cartoon industry ended up doing the same thing. Now, during this time period, cartoons had been deregulated by Reagan, but, you know, in the 70s and then again in the 90s, they were heavily regulated because parents' groups were up in arms. Oh, you're advertising to our kids and we have to protect our kids. And now you've got Tipper Gore saying we have to protect our kids. And, you know, we were a generation where we didn't want to be protected. We wanted to know what was going on. Right. And so we were fighting actively against it. So I just remember thinking, you know, why are you trying to prevent us? There must be something of value in this.
Yeah,
So,
because there's a fence. There must be something on the other side of it that I would want.
right. So, I mean, all that this did for me was like I looked for that sticker on
And it actually drove you.
It drove me to buy every album that I bought. In fact, the first heavy metal album that I ever got, I stole it actually from the PX. Don't steal, kids. Don't steal.
No.
But I did because I was a rebel. I was a bad girl, and I didn't have enough money to buy it. But it had the parental. Literally, the only reason I got it was for the sticker.
Because it had that sticker on it.
And I was like, well, this must be pretty evil. I'm going to get this. And it was called Megadeth. So I was like, oh, well, it's got death right there in the title. So
and
it must
therein began your
be
fascination
evil.
with that band.
That's right. That was my first metal band. And so, then of course I went back and bought like all their other albums. So I think I've made it up over the years. But
and then we've also rebought.
Yeah, I've
music over the
rebought
years.
lots of their stuff. But yeah, so I think that did have that effect. And I think Blackie Lawless from Wasp actually said, and in one interview anyway, he was saying, yeah, it ended up helping us out, by making it the forbidden fruit.
And you were in that club now.
I definitely was in that club. And I was also in the club. It was funny because I got that album, the Megadeth album, and right there in the song lyrics is, this spells out freedom. It means nothing to me as long as there's a PMRC. Like, music artists at this time were just up in arms about this whole thing. It kind of ended up just almost helping promote heavy metal, because at the time heavy metal, like especially really heavy metal, was not something that most people were very familiar with.
But now it's this controversial product.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I got to see what's going on.
And then not long after that, we get Headbangers Ball.
Yeah.
And we get,
So how did they tackle that on MTV?
Yeah, MTV did have different standards because then you're talking about the airways.
Right.
So it's different when it goes over the airways. So
they had edited versions.
They had edited versions. If your song had profanity, they would either like edit that whole section out, or you would have to have a safe for work version.
Well, that was where most of us first ran into Adam Curry. So.
Oh yeah, Adam Curry.
And that hair.
Oh, his hair was so dreamy.
I was a fan of the voice.
I was a fan of the whole thing. Yeah. Like I was just, believe me, I was a fan of the whole thing. And then when it changed to Ricky Rackman, I was like, oh man.
What happened to Adam?
I loved Adam. He seemed like he had integrity, and he had like that beautiful blonde hair.
I think he did. I mean, this is somebody that I've followed in other podcasts since then, and he continues to talk about how he parted ways with MTV. And it always impressed me that he was not vindictive. So it did suck when he left. But, he built their website from scratch when websites were a brand new thing. And he was like, hey, you're going to need this. And he owned MTV.com. And when he left, he gave that to MTV and said, hey, I'm not going to be a jerk about this here. And I'm sure there may have been more, can't talk about it kind of stuff that went on.
Right.
But, it was just one of those things where, he didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
So.
And he seems like a very cool guy. I mean, especially when it comes to like that whole time period, reading about all of that. And I don't really, constantly follow up on everything he's doing now, but I do know that he's heavily into the podcasting world. He was one of the earlier podcasters, right? I mean, I think
arguably the first.
Really?
To record content and then distribute it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, there's lots of other podcasting people who would disagree. But I definitely think he's pioneered some of the technology involved in RSS. He's very tech-minded and always has been. And forward-thinking. So the idea of using an RSS feed to send that stuff out and syndicate it, I mean, he doesn't harp on it too much, but you listen to him. He does a show called No Agenda, which, by the way, if you're going to go listen to that show, just be ready, trigger warning ahead of time. They go all over the place, so don't just go there blind. But
trigger warning?
Yeah.
What's the trigger?
Anything, almost anything.
Is it like a political show? Or
very, very political and very stylized at this point.
Okay.
They have like their own little jingles and all kinds of stuff like that. So if you're in the club and understand what they're doing, you'll just be like, in the morning, and you'll know what that means. So yeah, anyway, in the morning to all you out there who know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so that's just, I mean, before I even, to me, he's almost more of a figure from the podcasting world than he is in
I'd
TV.
be curious to know, how he got placed on Headbangers Ball, because is he a metalhead, really?
He's got a very deep appreciation of music. I really don't know. I couldn't speak for him what his personal preferences were, but He used to do this thing called, I know we're getting into the Adam Curry appreciation moment, but I'm sorry about that, everybody. But
well, it does follow directly off of Headbangers Ball, which, you know, I don't know. I can't say definitively like Headbangers Ball owes their show to the PMRC, but I think the PMRC created as much interest, if not more interest in metal than it ever quelled.
Well, Curry was DJing from a very young age before he was even allowed to. I think he was a big ham radio operator. There's pictures of him on his website of him in front of the rig. So when he sits down to put together a set of like a block of entertainment, he's really good at it, like at finding good songs that fit together. So even if he wasn't a metalhead to begin with, I think applying those talents to that type of music, he really understood really well how to mix, how to build a show that would go like have a high point and a low point. And he used to do this thing called Daily Source Code years ago, where he would just on a Friday afternoon, he would just go online live and he would DJ for an hour, 2 hours, and it would have even the little interstitials of like, earlier in the 80s, you know, we discovered what true love was. This song means everything. And then it would go into the song, and, you know, it was just really, really well produced.
Wow. I don't really have an ending to that, other than I will say that, as I was about to say earlier,
we should do a backmasking section at the end of this podcast.
Backmasking?
Where, you know, where it's all reversed, like they used to do on the songs.
Oh, yeah. We could totally do that.
And people will be like, oh, what is it?
There were several stores, including Walmart, who, as Walmart, JCPenney, Sears, and Fred Meyer, refused to sell any of the albums that had the parental advisory sticker on them. So it did actually lead to a decrease in record sales for the artists who had that label placed on them. And I just wanted to also point out that even though Tipper Gore fervently stated that she was not promoting censorship, I want to read some of the additional suggestions that the PMRC had, and that they stated in an article in the Washington Post that included printing warnings and lyrics on album covers, which they did basically, forcing record stores to put albums with explicit covers under the counter, pressuring television stations not to broadcast explicit songs or videos, so that sort of speaks to your MTV thing, and reassessing the contracts of musicians who performed violently or sexually in concert, and creating a panel to set industry standards.
That's pretty chilling. I mean, the idea that you could sign a contract and then have that reevaluated because of
something you do on stage,
which a lot of these people were using and were not the most reliable performers in that regard. So I could see, I mean, well, you look at that in today's light under a microscope, that would be pretty hard to figure out.
I mean, the fact that she called it industry or creating a panel, it just reminds me of the blacklisting, the McCarthy era days. You know, you've got panels of people who are deciding, and if you watch these tapes of these hearings, you will see some of the most ignorant, like, you know, we all think of Al Gore today. Well, we don't all. Some people really hate him, obviously, but, you know, putting aside political stuff, you sort of think of him as that documentary guy who wants to save the earth. Yeah,
I mean, he ran for president, then he was the sad hobo. And
he was the sad hobo, and
then he came out of nowhere with his whole documentary on what we're doing to Earth and
on all this, and so he seems super noble now and all this. But in these hearings, he is a total wad. Like, I mean, you just want to punch him in the face. Like, he's.
Tell me how you feel.
I mean, for real. Like, I applaud Dee Snider for not jumping across. You know, when Frank Zappa came out there, I'm sorry, I'm going back into this, but I told you I could
break it down.
Break it down. Okay, so when Frank Zappa came out there, he was like, Al Gore starts in with his questioning thing, and he's like, you know, I don't love everything that you say, and I disagree with you on some points, but I have to let you know that I'm a big fan of your work, and I really enjoy your music and all this other stuff. And a few people in the area are laughing and stuff like that. And even later, he talks to this guy next to him who weirdly has the last name Exxon. And he's like,
how does that happen?
I don't know. And he's like,
he was gassy.
He's like, you know, I guess you've never heard of the mothers of invention. And I'm like, all right, Al.
Wow.
You're trying super hard to let us all know how cool you are.
That, my friends, is rhetoric.
Well, so Frank Zappa's whole thing is this is all just a political manipulation because you guys, your wives are trying to distract the American public from what you're doing. You're trying to like pass all these crazy laws that don't have anything to do with music. And so it's all really boring. And he's like, if you really cared about kids and stuff like that, you would stop cutting funding to like school system stuff that enriches music education for children.
Oh, so he threw down.
Oh, he threw down. And they fought back. Like they were like really mad at him and sort of, I just think you're a one of the guys was just like a total jackhole. He was just like, I just think I'm marking all of this. He's like,
you've just been pushing that button.
I'm just pushing the button. I'm just going to keep cursing.
You guys have no idea how much of this show you haven't heard.
I mean, this guy was just like, I just think that you clearly don't know anything about how the government works. You don't know anything about how the music industry works. And this is like this old white crotchety guy.
He didn't play by the rules because they had their agenda.
That's
and
right.
They came out there and then he said, you know what? I'm going to pull this curtain back and go like, if you really cared about kids, how about this health program that you could just cut funding to?
Yeah. And then also like, I know what you're doing. And like, if you want to put the lyrics out there for people, that's what you need to do instead of you guys deciding for all of us. Well, then so John Denver comes out and he's very, he's very clear and he actually has some of the most articulate statements ever, which included the statement that
it's almost like he was really good at words.
If you do this, you're just going to make these types of music more desirable for children. That's all you're going to succeed in doing, which is the most prophetic thing ever. And then Dee Snider comes out at the end. He has this amazing statement. And when he finishes, they kick it over to Al Gore again. And right as he gets the microphone, before he ever really gets a chance to speak, Dee Snider goes, "Oh, are you going to tell me that you're also a fan of my music?" Which was hilarious. And he was like, "No, I am not a fan of Twisted Sister. And I do not support what you do." And and it was just like, you don't even know. Like, shut up, Al Gore. Like,
he fell for a classic trap. Dee Snider opened it up for a personal attack, and then Al Gore went on personal attack.
He super did.
Which is going to lose. You're going to lose in front of the American public.
And then the next guy grabs the mic. He's like, "Why did you feel the need to personally attack Tipper Gore or to attack Mr. Gore's wife?" He said, "I wasn't attacking his wife. I was attacking Tipper Gore as a member of the PMRC. Her name is Tipper Gore, right? I wasn't doing it because she's his wife.
Right.
I'm doing it because she attacked me. It does make me angry if you're saying all of these things about me that are categorically untrue." She had said in some thing that he had a T-shirt that had a woman with her legs splayed open and with her hands handcuffed behind her back on a T-shirt for Twisted Sister. And he was like, "I absolutely abhor sexism and I fight hard against it. And the fact that you're saying that I support something like that, it infuriates me."
Well, regardless of how that was taken at the time, that is now public record.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty great.
I mean,
so
if
I'm
it
just
was on
saying,
C-SPAN, that's in the Library of Congress.
Just go watch it, everybody. I'm saying, like, it's one of those things that really gets my blood pressure up, but at the same time, it's really awesome to watch the three of them from, like you said, very different musical styles and backgrounds and everything come in and sort of like stand up for all music.
So if they were Avengers, which ones would they be?
Well, I think clearly Frank Zappa would be Iron Man.
Okay.
And I think John Denver would be Captain America.
Yeah.
And Dee Snider would be Thor. Yeah, I think so. So, yeah. So there you go. And so that was a very interesting little parking lot conversation that we had.
It was. And I think that rounded out the show really well. I don't think we need to add or subtract with more stories. I'll just save the other things I had on my list and we can do this again sometime.
Yeah. I can go for more trips down memory lane through news articles from the 80s. It's kind of actually really fun to do.
Yeah, I thought it would be hard. The hardest part was picking, but I thought it would be hard to find things. And then once I started going back and reading, it was really interesting. So if you guys have any thoughts on news stories that affected you growing up, it doesn't have to be the 80s. It can be 70s, 80s, 90s, all the classics.
Something that you think would be really funny to hear us sort of riff on and talk about, send those to the Dreamland Podcast at gmail.com. You can also check us out on the internet
What is that?
It's this thing that they clearly didn't have in the 80s, because that answers all the problems of the PMRC problem. Just put them out there on the internet.
Well, there'll be a YouTube channel just reviewing records. I mean, I'm sure it's out there now. You can go watch some. I don't like this because it talks about,
Right. So you can find us at retroblasting.com/Dreamland. All of our show notes are there, and you can listen to this podcast right there on the internet in your web browser.
Yep, you don't have to download it, nothing fancy. You can just listen to it right on the web pages.
That's right.
Or you can put it in iTunes.
You can. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe in iTunes. And
review and subscribe.
That really helps us out, actually, because we've got some really nice comments on the iTunes, which is it makes me so happy to go on there and just see the super nice things instead of just mean comments. It's nice to go on the internet and find something positive. So thank you guys for doing that. That really makes my day.
And don't change that about you.
Yeah,
we like that
keep
about
being you.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.